Good afternoon to everyone joining us. We all appreciate you taking time out in your busy days, but I think that this event will prove to be most interesting. My name is Delano Roosevelt. I'm the president and CEO of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. We have wonderful speakers today and a terrific moderator. The discussion that our title of our discussion, or actually more of a collaborative conversation, will be looking ahead, what to expect in the Middle East in 2024. Our moderator this afternoon is National Council on U.S. Arab Relations board member, retired Colonel Abbas Dahouk. Colonel Dahouk serves as the president of Hyphen Point LLC and is a frequent commentator on numerous U.S. Middle East political and military affairs, appearing on several media outlets. Previously, Colonel Dahouk served as the United States Defense Attaché to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We also have two wonderful speakers this afternoon, and I will be introducing in the order of which they'll initiate speaking. Firstly, Mr. David Rundell. Mr. Rundell was the former chief of mission at the American Embassy in Saudi Arabia. He spent 15 years in the kingdom, and he is author of Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. Our second speaker today will be Ambassador Michael Gfoeller, who has served 30 years in the U.S. government, with half of that time being spent in the former Soviet Union and half of that time in the Middle East. During his time in the Middle East, he served as Deputy Chief of Mission and Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh. He also served as Senior Political Advisor to General David Petraeus, then Commander U.S. Central Command. And now it's my distinct pleasure to turn the program over to our moderator, Colonel Dahouk. Abbas?
Thank you, Del, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone here on my screen, David and Mike, and good day for all the watchers near and far. And welcome to our discussion today to try to explore some of the expectations on 2024 and talk about the major actors in the region. The 2024 seems a very challenging year for all actors in the region and for the United States. We all watch what's happening in Gaza. For the first time, Israel has declared war, and it is a very messy war, and there's a possibility of this war to go beyond Gaza. We see the already tit for tat in the with Hezbollah in the north. We see the militias in Iraq try to target all the U.S. interest and presence in the region. And for the first time now, there you have attacks on Jordan. So Jordan is now becoming part of the battlefield. And we also, for the first time, U.S. has lost 3 soldiers in the process. And with that, the U.S. have moved beyond deterrence, is now doing a preemptive strikes, is doing also a preventive strikes in the region. And there's a recent one yesterday also in Baghdad. And the region is not only Levant is on fire. We also Sudan is also going a civil war. Libya is still stuck between 2 countries. So there's a lot of issues happening and will happen this year. The big focal point on around all this rogue operations in the region is obviously Iran. Iran is picking a fight not only with Israel, it's picking a fight with the United States. Iran is on the verge of becoming a nuclear country, and we all know that they support, arm, train all these rogue elements inside the Israel, inside mainly Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. So our 2 guests, Mike and David, they're looking at Iran very closely, and I know they're working on a piece for to bring alternative to this militaristic approach to it. We know that the United States military has done a lot of war gaming on how to tackle Iran militarily, and they have lots of plans and lots of capabilities to do so. The issue is not the capability, military capability. The issue is political. Are we going to do that? It seems the Biden administration is putting that off the table and not entertaining the idea of hitting Iran directly. But how about hitting Iran softly? So I will give the mic to David or Mike to talk to us a little bit about your impressions, or like I mentioned, in the region, and maybe after that we talk about the civic engagement proposal you have in mind. So maybe Mike will go first.
There we go. Sure. I'll say a few words before turning it over to David. I think that the approach we would recommend with respect to dealing with Iran would be a re-intensification of the economic sanctions. Right now, Iran has received a tremendous amount of money, an estimated $51 billion, has either arrived or is on the way because of the partial relaxation of financial sanctions involving the unfreezing of large sums of money in South Korea and in Iraq. That's a substantial sum of money. Even greater is the amount of money that they're now earning from oil exports. Their oil exports have doubled from 750,000 barrels a day under the previous administration to about 1.5 million barrels a day now, which makes them one of the larger exporters in the Persian Gulf. So much of this money is making its way to Iran's proxies, including to the Houthis, the Hezbollahis, various other militias in Iraq. Many of them grouped together into the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the Popular Mobilization Militia Corps that has been part of the Iraqi Ministry of Defense since, 2015, I believe. So this poses problems for us because, of course, we lost 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan recently because of attacks by the Hashd al-Sha'bi, by the Popular Mobilization. So although Iraq is technically an ally of the United States, in fact, we lost 3 U.S. lives because of an attack launched by militias that are technically part of the Iraqi Ministry of Defense. So there's a confrontation and a contradiction there, no question about it. So how to deal with Iran? In our view, it would be wise at this point to make much more muscular use than we've been making in recent years, both of economic sanctions, but also of civil society engagement. Civil society engagement would involve much stronger political support for the very, very large freedom and liberation movement in Iran. Iran is home to dozens of so-called illegal labor unions. I would refer to them as free trade unions. It's home to dozens of organizations pushing for ethnic rights, religious freedom, women's rights, and greater democracy. The Western world, in general, has been very, very muted in its support for these movements so far, even though they enjoy enormous support inside Iran itself, as much as 80%, according to some of the underground polls I've seen. So it seemed to me that if we were interested in regime change in Iran while minimizing the damage to the Iranian people and to our interests in the region, it'd be very wise to have a much more muscular and assertive approach. That would, in some ways, mirror and mimic what we did toward the Warsaw Pact. And I'm a veteran of those years, having served in the Warsaw Pact country in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union during the 1980s. At that point, the leitmotif of our policy then was incredibly strong support for civil society and dissidents in those countries. And, several decades later, the entire Warsaw Pact is now part of NATO and the European Union. So obviously this nonviolent approach, focusing on soft power, can be very effective. That's not to say we don't need military power to contain Iran. We do. We need to work with our allies in the region to contain Iran. And I know they would all like more cooperation along those lines, more partnership with us in that area. But we've been neglecting tried and tested and true methods involving soft power. And I think personally that's a mistake.
Thanks, Mike. David, on the soft power and the civic engagement, Also in the United States, we got 65% of the American people do not like what the Biden administration doing or engagement with the Israelis, and and you see it's very difficult and he's not changing his policy despite this inside pressure, civic pressure. The Biden administration continue with this engagement policy towards Israel. At the same time, we know inside Israel, you have 70% of the Israelis do not like what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza, and yet Netanyahu is also not listening to that and continues with his military adventures in Gaza. So, also, how do you think that the regime, like Iranian regime, is very oppressive regime, might change their foreign policy or domestic policy from within? How is that?
Well, I would agree with Ambassador Gfoeller that the most pressing issue for the United States is our relationship or lack of relationship with Iran at the moment. That the other issues in Lebanon, Gaza, Jordan, Saudi Arabia are secondary to the potential for a significant conflict with Iran. And therefore, that really is the focus of our thinking at the moment. To answer your question, I think we have been at war, in a low-intensity war with Iran for well over 30 years. You have to remember that they took American diplomats hostage, that they blew up the American in Tehran, that they destroyed the American barracks in Beirut, killed several hundred American Marines, that they blew up Khobar Towers, that they were directly responsible for the death of many Americans in Iraq. So we have been at war with these people for some time. We have tried numerous approaches. We have tried an olive branch, if you will, which was the Obama administration's approach. I did not think it would work, but I did not fault the Obama administration for trying, for giving peace a chance. But at that time, there were those who strongly suggested that instead of trying to deal with the mullahs, we dealt with the people, and that we attempted through civic engagement to change the regime. And I think that was really the ultimate goal of civic engagement, as it was in the Soviet Union, to bring down the Communist Party in a peaceful manner, an organic manner. And so this is all an indirect answer to your question, that the idea is not really to get the Iranian regime to change their ways, but to change the regime. And the reason I say that is that the current regime, all of the things that we have tried, and I started to list them, we tried the Iran nuclear deal, we have tried economic sanctions, we have tried some covert activities. The Israelis have certainly been engaged in that. None of these things have really changed their behavior. Likewise, although it may be true that the United States has the capacity to bomb Iran, I don't think that we have the capacity to invade Iran. We could, it took 3 million people to occupy Germany. And that's a country that was smaller in size and fewer in population than Iran has today. So I don't think we're going to occupy Iran anytime soon. And this concept that we can bomb people a few times and that that's going to change their behavior, I think is erroneous. We've been bombing the Houthis for several weeks. That hasn't done much. We bombed the militias in Iraq and Syria, and they're still firing back at us. So that's not going to change things. What I'm doing is, if you will, painting a picture of what would be wrong with a military intervention. And there are two principal things that would be wrong. Actually, three. One is that I just pointed out it probably wouldn't be all that decisive in a deterrent. Secondly, Iran is not the Houthis. Iran would bite back. Okay, Iran, if the Houthis are able to shut down the Bab el-Mandeb with a relatively unsophisticated missiles, and the Iranians have even more sophisticated weapons, they would certainly try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. If we're going to have an air campaign against them based out of our bases in Qatar, you would be naive to think that they're not going to try and attack Udeid base, and that they would also probably bring in the Saudis into this, and that they could, in fact, severely damage the global oil exports from Saudi Arabia. So that's the second reason, that they're going to bite back. And the third reason not to do it, again, comes to your point. What we are trying to do, as Michael said, there is now very significant opposition to the regime in Iran from both their new people, if you will, who are upset because of the way they handled COVID, the way the economy is going, the way they're treating women, but more importantly, even from some of their traditional allies in the bazaar, who are also unhappy. And then you've got to remember that a large number of the Iranian population are not Persian. And so we have Azeris and Baluchis and Kurds and Arabs and other ethnic and religious minorities that are not happy with the reign of the Ayatollahs. So our suggestion would be not to forget about sanctions. I think they should be redoubled, as Michael said, not to forget about military action. We should continue to attack the proxies, but not Iran itself. And that we should then redouble our efforts, in fact, really invent our efforts to undermine the regime through civic engagement. And Michael is probably better able to discuss exactly how you would do that. There are many, many ways that we did that in the Soviet Union, and that would be our preferred approach, or not the only approach, but we would add that to the mix. Because final thing to say is that we do have some time, and this is important. The Iranians, if the Iranians become a nuclear power, that will dramatically change the status quo in the Middle East. The Saudis have stated clearly that if the Iranians get a nuclear bomb, they will try to get one. I would imagine the Turks would do the same. So we'll have an arms race, a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. If the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, they will then provide an umbrella, a powerful umbrella, for many of their proxies. And it would certainly be a greater threat to both Saudi Arabia and to Israel. So we really don't need that to happen. And this, I'm come to the end of my monologue here, but what do they need to have a nuclear weapon? They have got the missiles, because the Iran nuclear deal didn't really try to stop that. Efforts to stop them from getting the uranium, enriched uranium, have failed, as Michael said. They're now within a couple of weeks of taking their uranium to weapons grade, and that they could do that without much trouble. But what they don't have is a bomb mechanism. Okay, you can have a missile, you can have uranium, but the really tricky part is to try and make a bomb. Anybody who saw the Oppenheimer movie is well aware of that getting the uranium is only the first step. And they're still a ways away from that by everything that I've been able to gather. So we have some time. We don't have to, do something today or tomorrow. We have a year and a half in which to try and change the regime, because I don't think you're going to change their attitude. And that's my last comment, is that the idea, and I hear this from people, that if we just show the Iranians some respect, if we just recognize that they have legitimate concerns, that they will change their behavior. I don't believe that. I think it's been proven inaccurate over now more than 20 years. This is a regime that is driven not by its own national interests, but by its ideology. There really is no reason for many of the things that they do, except for their ideology and their ideological goals, which are basically to drive the United States out of the region, destroy Israel, which they say almost daily, and then to expand their own hegemony over the region. And that's what drives them, not the fact that they're not getting respect from the United States. And my last comment would be, Michael, how much did we just give them in released assets?
$6 billion that had been frozen in South Korea. There was talk of another, I believe it was $10 billion in Iraqi funds.
So 16 billion, I don't know how much more respect you need after we just give you 16 billion and you continue to support the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah. So I don't think that's going to change things. So in any event, that was a long answer to your question, but the question was, what do we do to convince the regime? And the answer is, I don't think you can convince the regime. I think you have to change the regime, and there are numerous ways of doing that.
Thanks, David. That was a very good, informative, and I do agree with you. The military is not an option. Strikes on Iran will invite more strikes, not necessarily against the United States, but against the regional allies and maybe U.S. interest and U.S. presence in the region. And so thus far, deterrence has not worked. Not only against the deterrence, all military deterrence and economic deterrence against not only Iran did not work, against also the proxies everywhere. But I think we'll ask Mike. The issue here too with the regime change is not just something that be isolated. We know that now Russia and China are looking at changing this world order, right? Trying to change the American dominance, and they see Iran as a close friend with them. They're basically working for Russia and China indirectly to put down this world order and the U.S. presence in the region, starting in the Middle East. So how do you, if you go on for regime change, how do you see that works at the global stage? How would countries like Russia and China, which we United States view them as foe? So how do you think how would they react to something like that?
Well, I don't like to look at it from the point of view of a zero-sum game. I mean, I think the most important factor to consider is what the Iranian people themselves would like. And what they would obviously like is a much freer society. It's in our interest to help them get there. I think another regime change war in Iran, a la Afghanistan or Iraq, would produce not very inspiring results. The last two wars didn't work out too well. Over 20 years in each case, trillions of dollars expended for really very dubious gains. So we shouldn't repeat that experiment again. Instead, I think we need to go back to an older model and try to help empower the Iranian people. And the best way to do that is through diplomatic and political means. So there's a host of civil society organizations we could be championing and working with in Iran. This can be done both overt and covert ways. We should not be trying to dictate political solutions. The Iranians know their country better than we do. They understand better than we ever will what kind of free society they might envision and be able to work out through a complicated political process in their own country. We need to stand up more, I think, for our own values and be less cynical and, dare I say it, European about this, because at the end of the day, sometimes American idealism can work out well in terms of long-term realism. Certainly supporting political change in Iran by supporting Iranian actors in favor of political change is going to be a much less expensive approach for us in terms of lives and treasure than a military approach would be. Now, how will Russia and China view that? I think they'll be pragmatic and they'll work with whatever Iranian regime happens to be in power. They have trade interests, including in the military sphere. They've got energy trade interests, especially in the case of China. Iran is now part of the BRICS. None of this would have to change necessarily if Iran had a more democratic government. So I think we need to focus on the bottom line here, which is helping the Iranian people to achieve the kind of regime that they want to see, as opposed to going in and dictating a solution produced by think tanks in the West.
Yeah, Colonel, let me just add something quickly to that.
Go ahead.
The Russians obviously have a strategic alliance, or at least a tactical alliance, with Iran today in terms of weapons and other trade. And they would probably try to help the mullahs stay in power. But China, I think it's important to understand that China shares America's interest in preserving a peaceful Middle East. China is heavily reliant on, far more reliant on Middle East oil than we are. And they actually are the ones who have, and I think this is fairly well known, after the Abqaiq attack on the Saudis, it was the Chinese who went to the Iranians and said, really, that was not a good idea, to take half the Saudi oil off the market, because guess what? We're buying a lot of it, and we didn't like the price going up. Likewise, I have read, I don't know this for a fact, but I've read that the Chinese have tried to tell the Iranians it would be a good idea to rein in the Houthis. So I don't necessarily think that the Chinese would be all that upset to see a radical revolutionary regime in Tehran removed. They wouldn't like to see it replaced by a Western ally like the Shah. They probably would resist that, but a neutral and more reasonable country in Iran, I think the Chinese wouldn't object to that at all. In fact, they'd probably think it was a good idea to have a quieter, peaceful government in Iran.
Thank you. I mean, that's also fit with the Chinese global approach. They also value soft power. They have economic powers and others. But okay, let's break it down to let's look at the region. I mean, recently you have this rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and so what do you think? How would we try to do a civic engagement or soft engagement, not necessarily a regime change, because I don't think maybe the Gulf countries will support a regime change, but how would we engage the Saudis to accept the approach you're talking about towards Iran? And the other question also, since you mentioned minorities, there's other minorities in Iran, like some Azaris or Armenian minorities, and you have Armenia as another. I know this is a little off the Middle East map, but this is a country, a democratic country that might have some play that the United States kind of approach plays Russia versus Iran to do this kind of diplomatic or engagement. So maybe Mike answer this, David, the Saudi approach to it. Maybe Mike, you can talk about the other minority approach through Armenia or other countries.
Well, I think that the Saudis have made peace with the Iranians and the Houthis because they didn't think that we were going to do anything about those two problems which they faced. And now they're quite content with the status quo, which is peaceful for them. You have to remember what the Saudis want right now are two things. They want to earn as much money as they can to pay for Vision 2030, which, as you know, is their development plan. And the second thing they need is peace and stability in the region, which is one of the reasons they're trying to create a better relationship with Israel, and also why they're trying to create a better relationship with Iran. So you're right. I don't think the Saudis are trying to keep the place peaceful. We would have to conclude that as long as you have the current regime in Iran, that's not going to happen in the long run. So I don't think the Saudis would do anything to stop our civic engagement. I think they would sit quietly on the sidelines and see how it went. They're not going to break off their relation with the Iranians, but I don't think they're going to in any way object to our efforts to engage with the Iranian people, as Michael suggested.
Mike?
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, if we remember what worked during the Cold War, what worked was a very powerful military posture in Europe that we had at the time. 300,000 U.S. troops were stationed there throughout the Cold War, and they were on hair-trigger alert, in addition to U.S. nuclear weapons, of course, including middle-range rockets in the Reagan administration. So we all remember the INF, controversy, and ultimately the INF treaty. So what worked there was a combination of strength and civil society engagement. I think it would work again in terms of Iran. It's certainly worth a try. It's worked better. Our previous approaches have not worked, and I do agree with David that as a result, we will soon be confronted with an Iran that either possesses nuclear weapons or has the ability to develop them quickly. I mean, the Iranians right now have a large supply of highly enriched uranium at the 60% enrichment level. to go from 60% to 90%, which is what you require for weaponization, only takes a few weeks. The Wisconsin Wisconsin University Peace Institute indicates or estimates it would take about 3 weeks to get there. And IAEA estimates are similar. So we're really on the knife's edge right now. Now, Armenia does have very close relations with Iran. Iranians and Armenians are closely related ethnically, and they've long had very close trade and economic relations because Armenia's eastern and western borders are blocked by Turkey and Azerbaijan, respectively. So their only way to reach the outside world is through Georgia to the north and Iran to the south. And there is a large ethnic Armenian community in Iran itself, mostly in the northwestern part of the country and in Isfahan. So yes, it'd be possible to use our very close relationship with Iran in the United States. We have a large Armenian diaspora. 2 million Armenian Americans live in our country. So we have a close relationship with Armenia. And if one wanted to conduct back-channel diplomacy or covert tactful diplomacy with Iran, cooperation with Armenia would be one way to do it. That's actually a good suggestion. One of my worries is that, of course, at some point, the unstable situation in the Caucasus could give us yet another Middle Eastern war to worry about. The fact of the matter is that Azerbaijan has been making very threatening statements toward Armenia, even though they recently managed to reabsorb Nagorno-Karabakh. Many people thought that would lead to, perhaps the initiation of a peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Certainly, the United States has been working very hard to gather the European Union to make that happen. Yeah, if it doesn't happen, if we have a new conflict in the Caucasus, that would inevitably draw in Russia, Turkey, Iran, and Azerbaijan. And, we would then have a truly major war just to the north of Iran. So that's a source of destabilization we need to be thinking about as we think about what might happen in 2024.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, this is something will keep the Iranian regime very busy, besides their rogue interference on the West in Arab countries. And they have to worry about the northern front for the regime. And also they worry about their eastern front with Baluchistan. So more pressure on them on that front, perhaps that would weaken their resolve and perhaps they'll change their political calculus. I want to switch to the current visit of the Secretary of State to the region. This is his fifth visit since the Israel-Gaza war started. This is unprecedented for 5 visits, and trying to come up with some kind of solution, at least to do a short ceasefire to bring more humanitarian aid to Gaza and try to release those hostages. So this specific visit, I think it's a focal, it's an important visit because the United States now is entered a stronger position in the region. Like I mentioned earlier, they're not just waiting and taking strikes from the proxies. U.S. now is on the almost offensive. They're doing preemptive strikes. They're doing preventive strikes. They're not just doing self-defense. And they're engaged in 2 simultaneous low-boil wars. One is on the north against the Iranian proxies in the north, and one in the south with allies against the Houthis to protect the international waterways. And now the visit to this 5th visit with somewhat framework where Hamas accepted some of it with some conditions. And it seems that the Netanyahu government refused it all out. Netanyahu says basically the only option for him is total victory. And total victory means the defeat of Hamas. All right. And that's not going to work perhaps with Hamas. And also Hamas wants total ceasefire. And that's not going to agree with Biden, because a total ceasefire meaning that the Israeli lost their campaign. Especially Hamas still on the table. So that means Israel lost their war. It'll be the first time ever Israel will lose war in the Middle East. So this is a conundrum, but it seems like there's no solution. But Secretary of State thinks that he's still hopeful and still he can broker some kind of ceasefire and return some of the hostages. So how do you think, just based on what I said and what you read in the media and all over in the press, how do you think is there a hope that the Secretary of State might be successful this time?
Well, let me just make my comments first, and then Michael and I have not discussed this, so you may very well hear two different views.
It's okay.
I don't share the views that you have heard in the media. I think the Israelis have already lost this war. It's not that they're going to lose it; they have lost it. What were their primary goals and objectives? They wanted to destroy Hamas. They will not destroy Hamas. If you look at the details, Hamas tax collectors and even traffic policemen are still operating in parts of the Gaza. So they have not eliminated Hamas, and they will not eliminate Hamas. They have not gotten back all their hostages, and they will not get back all their hostages. And they're right now, at this time, there are 150,000, you might call them refugees, displaced people. Israelis who have had to leave their homes. They have not gone back. How many of them ever will go back? What condition they will go back under? So the idea that Mr. Netanyahu thinks he's going to have a complete victory, I think, is a pipe dream. I also think that part of the reason he's not going to be totally successful is, in fact, exactly because Mr. Blinken and President Biden have put tremendous pressure on the Israelis to really begin to withdraw. And these are just facts. I mean, last week, the Israelis demobilized an entire armored division. This week, they have already demobilized special forces units. They're winding this thing down. And they're doing that not because they want to, but because they've been put under tremendous pressure by the United States and perhaps the global community, but mostly the United States, because they cannot produce the artillery shells or the tank shells, and certainly not the precision-guided missiles that they need. So the United States has a tremendous amount of torque on them. And I think it's very important to remember that the interests of the United States and the interests of Israel are frequently not the same, and that the United States frequently puts pressure on Israel. When I read in the newspaper people saying, oh, the Israelis control the American government and the Israelis do just tell Washington and it jumps and Washington says how high. I remind those people, perhaps they hadn't heard about the Suez Crisis, where President Eisenhower forced the Israelis and the British to abandon their efforts. And perhaps they haven't heard about the Yom Kippur War, where Secretary of State Kissinger actually told them not to mobilize before the war when they began to think that it was going to happen, and then told them to stop their efforts to encircle and destroy the Egyptian army in Sinai, which they wanted to do both, and we told them no. Perhaps these people have forgotten Operation Desert Storm, when President Bush said, if you, Israeli Air Force, go to strike the Scud missiles in Iraq, I will shoot down your planes. So the idea that they just do what they want and we let them go is just historically inaccurate. And I believe that this time we have made it very clear to them that this annihilation of the Palestinians that they may have, some of them, certainly some of their leaders were proposing, is not going to happen. And not only do we have their military equipment that they need, and they know that they need from us, but there are many other things that we have the ability to do. There are proposals to have a global arms embargo on Israel in the United Nations. Who is going to veto that? The United States. There are proposals that everyone should recognize a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. Would the United States go along with that? Well, so there are many ways that the Americans have leverage on the Israelis. And I believe that Secretary Blinken, regardless of what you read in the newspaper, has used some of that. And I'll just give you one other example. I mean, you probably saw maybe almost 2 weeks ago, 22 Israeli soldiers were ambushed and killed in one day, 22 of them. Well, what were those soldiers doing? Those soldiers were setting demolition charges in a building that they wanted to take down. Why would you have 22 soldiers in a building setting demolition charges if you could just take it out with an airstrike? Perhaps because the Americans had told you that these airstrikes on civilian areas are not a good idea. So I think the United States has already exerted significant pressure on the Israelis, and that it's going to have an effect, and that as a result, the Israelis are probably not going to get everything they wanted. So anyway, that's my take on it. I'll listen to what Michael has to say.
Okay. Mike?
So I think the 2 points I mentioned that David didn't have time to mention in his excellent summary, which I strongly agree with, is the fact that the physical infrastructure and the housing stock in Gaza has largely been destroyed, and most of the population now is clustered around the crossing point at Rafah in the south on the Egyptian border. So the question really is this: if there is a ceasefire, what do we do with the 2.3 million inhabitants? Telling them to go back home and these homes no longer exist is not going to work. And maintaining a huge population like this in tents in Gaza, which was never a very hospitable place for people to live to begin with, is going to be an enormous task. And rebuilding the Gaza Strip is going to cost vast sums, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And it'll take years because all the infrastructure is gone: electricity, water, sewage. So I think what we're looking at really is the danger of mass casualties from disease and from starvation. And that's the next crisis that's going to hit the world community. So who's going to pay for what may be one of the largest relief efforts ever? I mean, this kind of resembles what happened to the Kurds in 1991, only they had a place to flee to. And the Gazans do not, because they're not going to be allowed to go into the Sinai. And if they did, where would they go? So we have essentially a city of 2.3 million people has been dismantled. The population is still there, all clustered into tent cities at the bottom portion of the strip around Rafah. And what happens next? And then the other big question is, what happens to Rafah? Because Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying that he would like to take control of the Rafah crossing. Just yesterday, he made a statement saying he was going to order his troops to begin for that, to prepare for that type of operation. The Egyptians, of course, have steadfastly said absolutely no way. The status quo has to continue. And indeed, it's part of the architecture of the Camp David agreements. So I think this crisis is putting huge pressure on Camp David. And Camp David, of course, is the foundation of our entire Middle East policy. Without the Camp David peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, we don't really have much of a Middle East policy or political architecture in the Middle East. So that's what's at stake right now.
Thanks. I mean, you know what Netanyahu thinks about Camp David and the Oslo process. He's been working against it all his career. So that's not going to happen under the current Israeli government. He's very clear about that. But I do agree with David that Israel will not be able to win in Gaza. We know the mission. Speaking of a former soldier here, that mission statement they have is unachievable mission. Total victory, total annihilation of Hamas, de-radicalization of the whole region. That's obviously it's unachievable. And the whole conduct of the operation in Israel. Usually in the standard conventional military, we say information or intelligence drives operation. What we see before you in Gaza was not intelligence-driven operation, it was a revenge-driven operation. I mean, the total destructions of everything in Gaza and try to really, it's like if you go and blind into it. And that's why one reason, what you mentioned, David, is about killing the Israeli soldiers. That's one reason why Israel has about 20% of friendly fire. And also, one instance that they actually killed the prisoners after they have a yellow flag, a white flag raised. So it is this unachievable mission. But people in the region are basically saying, if like you say, U.S. still has pressure or some kind of carrots or sticks, whatever it can bring to slow down the Israelis, nobody's seen it yet. I mean, you have over 27,000 killed already, men, women, and elderly. I mean, at what time you bring those, the U.S. will exercise pressure. So it's, we all understand that Israel is a sovereign country and they have to do whatever they have to do. But we'll see. I mean, I hope the Secretary of State has other tricks in his diplomatic tools, and he will be able to bring the Netanyahu government to at least do a temporary ceasefire and to get some hostages out and some humanitarian aid in Gaza. But I want to switch to another also problematic place for us, for the U.S. government, for the Biden administration, is Iraq. We know we have about 2,500 soldiers in Iraq, and the Iraqi government is now in discussion with the U.S. government to try to move the soldiers, perhaps disengage somehow. But at the same time, the United States has escalated their retaliation against the Iranian-led proxies. Again, first it was in a self-defense. Now seems like they're going after them preemptively, and also trying to find out or kill all the leaders that were involved in killing of the 3 U.S. soldiers. So the Prime Minister of Iraq, is in a bind between U.S. because he needs the U.S. presence in the country. I think. He might not need the counter-ISIS coalition anymore because I think the Iraqi government, the Iraqi armed forces, they feel confident that they can tackle that themselves. But he still needs the U.S. presence to train, advise, and assist on all this myriad of U.S. equipment in the country. The F-16s will not be able to fly. The M1 Abrams will not be able to drive, and all the others without U.S. presence in the country. So how do you see how do U.S. and Iraq would try to tackle these challenges? The government of Iraq is willing to exercise its authority over the whole Iraq, but then you have Iran also trying to interfere in between. So, Mike, how do you think this will materialize here in the next 6 months or so?
Oh my gosh, a worsening conflict, because Iran is not going to back off from its long-standing ties with the militias that make up the popular mobilization. And this is really the problem. They're part of the official structure of forces of the Ministry of Defense in Iraq. And I've thought since the ISIS war since 2015 that this issue was going to flare up as it has now. And like I said earlier, this is the primary problem right now in U.S. Iraqi relations. And I think the Iraqi government has some tough choices to make, but God knows Iran has myriad means of bringing pressure against individual Iraqi political leaders. Bribery, coercion, assassination, intimidation, you name it. They've been doing all these things since 2003, and they have a vast network of support inside Iraq, especially Arab Iraq. Even in Kurdistan, their means of influencing the political elite up there are myriad. So, yeah, I don't see an easy solution to this one. I think clearly we're also not going to back off from our policy of punishing people who have been responsible for the death of American troops. And we have to have a policy like that if we want to exert any kind of deterrence. Fail to do so would just be to invite more casualties, more attacks. So it's a fundamental contradiction in the U.S. In the Iraqi policy and in our relationship with Iraq. They're an ally. At the same time, Iraqi forces attack American forces with the support of Iran. It's a fundamental contradiction.
Okay.
I would just add that, the pressure, if we continue to have attacks that kill Iraqi civilians, pressure on the Iraqi government to expel the American forces will mount and eventually become perhaps unstoppable. And that when the American forces do leave, that will mean the total takeover, really, of the Iraqi government by Iranian influence. which is what they have been working on for 20 years. And once we finally leave, and Michael, again, he didn't emphasize this perhaps as much as he usually would like to, because he actually saw this when it began. He was actually physically there. And the Iranians have been trying to subvert the government of Iraq for 20 years. And the final withdrawal of the Americans will simply open the door for them to do that. Now, I don't know if I've misspoken, Michael, you correct me, but I always thought that was the basic outline of what's going on.
That's long been their strategic goal, yeah, and they're moving closer toward it, no question about it. Their aim has always been to make Iraq into a client state of what I refer to as the Neo-Iranian Empire, which is composed largely of, client militias and proxies, and is flourishing now in a way it hasn't ever before. Yeah.
Okay, just one final question before I pass it back to Del for his final remarks. Back to you, David, on the you seem to think that U.S. has still a lot of pressure or a lot of tools in its diplomatic bag to pressure Israel. We know on the Israel is worried also on this northern front. It's worried that what happened on October 7th in Gaza would actually replicate itself on the northern border, because we all know Hezbollah is more capable. They can do more damage, but obviously Hezbollah is no match to the Israeli Air Force. At the same time, you have right now the U.S. engaging in diplomatic efforts in Lebanon with the special envoy Augustine going and talking to Lebanese authorities. Lebanon has no president and have a caretaker government, but he's talking to them on perhaps replicate what he did on the maritime borders between Israel and Lebanon, try to do a demarcation of the land borders. And I think from the U.S. perspective, this will slow down the hostilities between Israel and Lebanon, and perhaps will prevent a war between Israel and Lebanon. But as you know, if Netanyahu is still in power, he has to do something. He has to push Hezbollah back towards at least 40 kilometers or so north of his borders, or somewhat contain them. Do you think U.S. will be successful? Would diplomacy win in Lebanon, or do you think U.S. will lose and Israel will actually perhaps conduct war against Hezbollah? Because remember, Hezbollah and Israelis already had a low-boil war, so it's happening. There's over 150 killed in Lebanon for Hezbollah. Over 100 Hezbollah operatives killed. And also Israel is targeting Hezbollah in Syria. So that's already, the ground is already there. So that could escalate if U.S. diplomacy fails. So what do you just your observation in general? What do you think? Are you optimistic things going to work out? Nothing's going to happen there, or it might escalate?
I'm sorry to have to tell you, but I don't know. That's a long. I asked a long question.
It's a long question. I know.
A very short answer, which is what you've just said is correct. And I don't have a crystal ball on that one, and I don't know enough about the actors. I would say the only that I think it's unlikely that Mr. Netanyahu will be the prime minister of Israel a year from now, probably even less. And so his policies the policies of Israel may well change. And what you said is correct. I mean, that they have an insecure northern border. They have to push the Hezbollah back. Are they going to be willing to go to war to do that?
Okay.
My guess would be no, but I don't really know.
That's fair enough. I don't know if Mike want to comment a bit on this or on a diplomatic dimension. If not, that's okay. We'll.
I think diplomacy will fail, and we'll have another conflict on the northern border. Yeah, I'm pessimistic. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, something has to happen there, but yeah, we'll see. Okay. Well, thanks. It's been very informative. It's great. I enjoyed as usual. Hopefully, we'll do it again in the near future. And I will pass it to our president and CEO, Del, to close this session.
Wow. Colonel Abbas, thank you so much for guiding us through this much informative, highly informative trip through what's happening currently over there. I must say, from a personal note, this is an A-team perspective all the way. These comments and this discussion are incredibly important for us, the viewers, that aren't intimately involved, as you all are, in the goings-ons in this region. And what we're hearing today is our issues and comments and thoughts that we're not hearing through the media, that we will not hear through the media. And it's very enlightening and informative, to say the least. And it's especially effective because your comments today, you have all backed up your current views based on historical facts as well, which is refreshing, to say the least. So with that, I want to thank you all. And of course, your comment, Colonel Abbas, about we hope that we can do more of these. It is certainly our intention at the National Council to do this. I think we have a terrific group here that stays vigilant and remains relevant as we move forward. So this conversation, to all of you out there that are joining us, will change in 60 days, I'm sure, and in an ever-changing atmosphere. So with that, for all of you out there, if you want to share this, it will be available on various social media outlets, obviously on YouTube, Twitter, on our website, if you want to review it later. We encourage you to share what you've seen and heard today, as it is truly relevant information. And with that, I think we are at 2 minutes before the hour. So I want to thank you all from our hearts at the National Council for your participation. The three gentlemen here on screen, I can't tell you how enlightening this has been for all of us, and we hope to do more of these in the future. So with that, many thanks for your involvement. You've been very generous with your time. And to all of the viewers participating, thank you for your participating, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So, Colonel, do we get to ask you some questions now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.